All right, Ramona, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Joel.
You're welcome, and thank you for stepping up and giving us a presentation.
Absolutely, I appreciate the opportunity. So good morning, everyone. My name is Ramona Sanders, and I will be your host for today's webinar on BSEE's environmental stewardship. I am the Bureau's Senior Environmental Stewardship Coordinator, and I work in the Office of the Director. And I've been serving in this newly created role since October 2020. My job is to help guide the direction of the Bureau's environmental stewardship efforts by, one, serving as an advisor to the Director and Bureau senior leadership. I also serve as a liaison within the Bureau and between the Bureau and the Department, as well as with other federal agencies and external partners. And third, I provide technical analyses that will help inform my coordination. So just to give you a little bit about my background, prior to this job, I served as the Chief of the Environmental Monitoring Unit under the Office of Environmental Compliance in the Gulf of Mexico for a little over 8 years. And in that role, I managed the multidisciplinary team on air, water, ecological, and other environmental issues. I helped develop BSEE's environmental compliance program, and that included risk-based environmental inspections, enforcement, and the coordination to support all of that work. And then prior to that, I worked as a structural engineer with the Office of Structural and Technical Support for about 5 years, where I primarily managed offshore platform decommissioning, permitting, policies, and coordination. So in today's webinar, I'd like to provide a general introduction on BSEE's environmental stewardship by first defining what environmental stewardship means, second, discussing why environmental stewardship is important, third, exploring how environmental stewardship applies to you, and finally, sharing where we are as a Bureau and where we're going on this very important concept. At the end, we'll open it up for questions and further discussion. I will say, however, please feel free to ask questions or offer thoughts along the way using the method that's most comfortable for you. Now, before we go too much further, I expect that most of you that are tuned in to today's webinar are district inspectors. However, I'd like to know if we have anyone with us who is not a district inspector, just so that I can keep that in mind as we talk through the material. So I'll give you a minute or so to type the name of your office in the chat box. And Joel, I'd appreciate it if you could read out some of the offices that are represented today.
Not a problem, Ramona. Looks like we have Charles Arnold is going to be the outstanding one as far as from a different office other than inspections. And looks like we have all the districts represented.
Okay, so Charles, welcome. So what is environmental stewardship? A multidisciplinary working group that had representation from headquarters in every region was pulled together by Director Salerno in 2016 to define environmental stewardship. And the consensus was that environmental stewardship is the responsibility of all BSEE employees to carry out to the highest standards all duties that contribute directly or indirectly to the management, protection, and care of the coastal, marine, and human environment. So I like this definition because it recognizes the scope of environmental issues. It recognizes that there are BSEE employees whose day-to-day duties are specifically about environmental oversight and protection. And it also recognizes that there are BSEE employees whose day-to-day duties may not directly involve managing environmental issues, but their activities, their processes, procedures, and their decisions have consequences on the environment. Now, that's a complex version of what environmental stewardship means. So if I were to just put it very simply, we protect the nation's environmental resources. And I would encourage you to keep this simple definition in mind as we continue throughout today's webinar. Now let's discuss why environmental stewardship is so important. I'd like to start from the perspective of the nation's environmental resources we protect. The quality of our marine and coastal waters that serve as a home to millions of plants and animals and serves as a source of food. The quality of the air that we breathe. The health of animal and benthic life, such as the North Atlantic right whale, one of the world's most endangered whales, or Mercurius species that inhabit our seafloor, such as the long-spine sea urchin shown here in Stetson Bank. Consider the human environment, such as the socio-cultural issues with Alaska Natives and their sustenance concerns, or the commercial and recreational fisheries that contribute to our socio-economic interests, or even the objects and sites of archaeological and historical significance that we occasionally come across during offshore operations and have to conserve. And finally, the fascinating habitats found beneath the sea and along our coast, such as the Channel Islands in the Pacific or the Brenton Sound Wildlife Refuge in the Gulf. As you can see, the nation's resources are vast and diverse across regions and deserve protection while we meet the nation's energy needs through offshore exploration and development. Environmental stewardship applies across BSEE. So remember, we protect the nation's environmental resources. And to do that effectively really requires an integrated approach to preparedness, to prevention, compliance, and enforcement activities for all offshore energy. That's both conventional oil and gas as well as renewable energy. And environmental stewardship not only applies to the Bureau's Environmental Compliance Program, but it also applies to our Incident and Investigations Division. It applies to our Enforcement Division. We have Offshore Regulatory Branch who play a very vital role in environmental stewardship. Our Regional and District Field Operations have a role. Also Preparedness Division. And even our National Training Center has an important role to environmental stewardship. BSEE employees need to be able to identify where they contribute to environmental stewardship. And I believe this is essential to employees defining their individual purpose, performing their responsibilities well, and supporting the Bureau's mission. And so to help with this process, we've organized environmental stewardship into 4 primary categories. And that is environmental standards, interagency consultation and the NEPA Environmental Policy Act, compliance and enforcement, and performance and adaptive management. And then we further evaluate the interactions between BSEE and offshore operators, the interactions between BSEE and other external partners. We look at the operator's responsibility because they're just as much as an environmental steward as we are. And then we look at the tools that help us manage the quality of all that work that we perform. And collectively, these 4 categories and the activities that we perform under each of them ultimately affect our nation's environmental resources. So let's take a further look at each of these categories and the activities that you may perform or support. So you may have a role in developing or supporting environmental standards. And these are the things that guide our environmental oversight and influence how we conduct activities that affect environmental resources. So you may have a responsibility to communicating laws and developing the regulations, the standards, operational conditions, and guidance to help implement those laws and regulations and minimize or prevent environmental impacts. You may have a role in coordinating with federal, state, and other partners on these laws, regulations, standards, conditions, and guidance. And as I mentioned before, operators have a responsibility as well. They maintain awareness of the laws and the regulations that they must abide by. They have the opportunity to contribute information and provide feedback on the application of these environmental standards. And then we use tools such as the Federal Register to gather information, feedback, and comments. We have interagency agreements with partners, and we set up working groups to collaborate on developing environmental standards. You may have a role in developing or supporting interagency consultation and what we call NEPA compliance. And these are the activities and the issues and coordination needs that direct and inform our decision making. So some of the BSEE responsibilities with operator interactions may be evaluating and coordinating environmental reviews on things such as well permits, APDs and APMs, et cetera. Looking at facility safety system permits, coordinating the reviews on structure permits for installations, modifications, and removals, or pipeline permit installation, modifications, and removals. You may be involved in flaring and venting requests and ensuring that there's been adequate analysis, environmental analysis performed before making those decisions. And then you may have a responsibility to communicate environmental conditions that establish operating limits on offshore activities as you're giving approvals on these applications. Your role may be with external partners in terms of performing required environmental consultations with other federal agencies. Operators have a responsibility to perform their own environmental analysis and consider operating limits based on their own assessments. And then we use tools such as policies and standard operating procedures, training, and IT systems such as eWell and TIMS to support this work. You may have a role in developing or supporting compliance verification and enforcement. And this is the segment of environmental stewardship that I think will resonate with most all of you in today's webinar. This work entails reviewing activity reports for compliance, for example, well activity reports or end of operations reports. You may be looking at a decommissioning or installation report and determining did the operator comply with the environmental requirements or with the operation itself that could have an environmental impact. You may be, well, likely most of you are performing field inspections, such as pollution and environmental inspections, performing oil spill response equipment and verification, or overseeing oil spill exercises to assess the preparedness of companies to deal with a significant spill event. You may be conducting incident or accident investigations, issuing inks and civil penalties. In terms of your interactions with other partners, external partners, through the compliance and enforcement work, you may be coordinating with them and communicating information from these activities that we do in the office and in the field focused on environmental issues or having environmental impacts. Operators are encouraged to perform their own compliance monitoring, and they're obligated to report activities and incidents and cooperate with our inspections, in our investigations, in our monitoring. And then we use tools similar to the previous slide, such as policies, standard operating procedures, training, and IT systems to support this work. So let's consider compliance and enforcement from another perspective. Before BSEE was developed in 2011, environmental inspections were focused on the prevention and investigation of accidents and incidents that had unauthorized environmental consequences. So we were primarily looking at things like loss of well control, significant spills, both oil and hazardous fluids, structural and mechanical failures, and then marine debris. Okay, and so these are the things, these are the impacts that we consider to be pollution or simply unauthorized. And during that time, inspections were performed by field operations, which included the districts in the region, inspectors and engineers. since Deepwater Horizon, BSEE was developed, and the environmental inspection focus expanded to include monitoring of other impacts such as air emissions, pressure wave acoustics, bottom disturbances like anchoring, discharges, looking at the placement and siting of offshore infrastructure, looking at how leases are developed and potential space use conflicts with other users of the OCS, such as the fishing industry or other federal agencies who may have some oversight on the OCS. And these impacts are considered authorized impacts that require monitoring. So that's one thing I think folks find interesting when it comes to in the environment, is that you have events that are simply unauthorized, but then you can also have impacts to the environment that all are authorized, but they require some additional monitoring just to ensure that they stay within an acceptable parameter. And so since Deepwater Horizon, with the development of BSEE, we now have regional environmental scientists, engineers, and specialists who assist with the environmental compliance program and help carry out this expanded focus, coordinating on inspections, looking at both unauthorized events as well as routine authorized impacts. And so if you were to break this down a bit further, our district field operation inspectors, regional field operations, and our oil spill preparedness division have continued to monitor those things associated with well control and spills, structural and mechanical failures, and marine debris, events that may impact environmental resources. And then we have a specialized team within the Bureau, which is the Office of the Environmental Compliance in the Gulf of Mexico. And then we have environmental compliance officers represented in the Pacific and the Alaska regions who help carry out the monitoring for all these other potential environmental impact factors. So we certainly broaden the community of folks who are involved in the compliance and enforcement with the development of BSEE. And last, performance and adaptive management. You may have a role in developing or supporting this. And this is really an important part of environmental stewardship because it gives us the opportunity to evaluate and learn what we are doing well and where we may need to adjust and improve. And so a lot of the work that's being done on the environmental standards side, the consultation and NEPA side, as well as the compliance and enforcement work, feeds into this performance and adaptive management. And so you may be involved in performing and monitoring safety and environmental audits. You may be engaged in performance reviews of operators, looking at the history of violations that have accumulated over time to determine how well a company is doing. You share information and learn through industry group meetings and conferences. In terms of the interactions with external partners, you may be part of providing that feedback to BOEM, our sister agency. BOEM does a lot of, they do the leasing, they do the bulk of the environmental analysis that supports the offshore energy program. And it's very helpful for them to have access to the information that we're collecting on the BSEE side through our compliance and enforcement work, because it allows them to determine, are the environmental standards that they're setting, are they effective? Do they need to be revised or reworked? Are they practical in the field? We also communicate environmental information to the public through our Public Information Office. Operators are encouraged to perform self-audits and exercises and to train their workforce. That really is an obligation. And then we have tools such as vital statistics. We have research within BSEE, studies that we collaborate on with BOEM and with other federal agencies to evaluate the state of things. We have change management processes. Many of you may be familiar with CMI's, Change Management Initiative, to identify an area of improvement and really track it down to a resolution. We have the SEMS tool on the conventional side. We have what they call SMS, that's going to be on the renewable side. And then we have IT systems to support all of the work that we're doing here, to support the analysis and other forms to communicate that information. Any questions before I move forward?
Ramona, I've been scanning as you were talking and presenting, and I see no questions right now.
Okay. Thank you, Joel.
All right.
So let's talk about where we are and where we're going with environmental stewardship. Last year, my assistant coordinator and I developed a plan to help understand the current state of BSEE's environmental stewardship and to outline what we wanted to accomplish in order to help set the course for the future. And obviously, you know, this takes into consideration that we have administration changes and leadership changes, and so they ultimately direct the course of direction, and may influence and change the way, you know, the direction in which we go. But our goal last year was to begin to engage, learn, and implement. And we recognize that this is a continuous process. So it was really a short-term plan, to set up more of a long-term execution. So we defined 11 goals to focus on over 3 priorities. And so I wanted to take a little bit of time to share with you what we've done to date under each of those priorities and where we plan to go. The first priority was to engage BSEE senior leadership and BOEM senior environmental leadership. The second priority was to identify and update critical policies that capture or should capture the environmental stewardship mission. And then third, to develop environmental stewardship goals and a long-term plan for coordination. So under the priority 1, I just wanted to share first what we've accomplished so far. I've had introductory meetings with all of the regional directors. I've met with all of the Bureau program chiefs, so I've met with the offshore regulatory programs. I've met with Eric Miller with the OSPD, Dave Fish, who's the chief of the Environmental Compliance Division. I've met with the Office of Policy and Analysis and that chief, Molly Madden, the Safety and Incident Investigations Division, which is Mike Azoric, and I've also met with Janine Tobias and the Safety Enforcement Division. I've met with solicitors, public affairs. I've met with the new REN team within BSEE, which is led by Sherry Hunter. And I've also met with other senior advisors and coordinators within the Office of the Director. I've established routine engagement with DOI on environmental issues covering NEPA, covering other administration priorities that are coming up. And I also meet pretty routinely with BOEM's environmental leadership in headquarters. Where we're going, I want to have additional introductory meetings with regional branch chiefs, regional supervisors, and district managers. That's something that's really important because a lot of the work really is coming, from these program offices, and I want to make that connection. I also want to be able to host additional webinars and support future trainings that center on specific environmental issues, and so I'd be really interested to hear from you all some of the things you have an interest in understanding a little bit better in order to do your jobs well. In terms of the second priority, identifying and updating policies, so I've collaborated on revising critical policies pertaining to BSEE's environmental compliance program. Some of you may have heard about all things meetings that the previous director had established. I've restructured and I facilitate a monthly all things environmental stewardship, which basically serves as a forum just to share information, to learn and to improve coordination. It's just to help break up some of the silos that can tend to exist within the organization, and to make certain that we're all aligned and on the same page. Where we're going, I'm looking at policies against the new administration and the department's environmental priorities. So some of the priorities that have been laid out pertain to things like better tribal engagement, environmental justice, things such as climate change resilience. So those things are on the horizon, and really trying to understand how they translate into BSEE and our responsibilities. And lastly, in terms of developing environmental stewardship goals and a long-term plan for coordination, so I've met with BSEE authorities on potential metrics and data sources for both conventional and renewable activities. I've also mapped environmental stewardship touch points with BSEE programs in order to help guide long-term coordination so that it's strategic and it's smart. And where we're going, you know, again, looking at BSEE's actions with administration and department environmental priorities. And also the renewable energy program is a major administration priority. And so we should be seeing some more activity on the BSEE side when it comes to supporting renewable energy offshore. So I see that as a future focus. So now let's look at where we're going, where we are and where we're going based on data. And I think this is something that you all may be able to relate to a little bit more better, a bit better than some of my more high-level plans. So I'm tied into Vital Statistics as the Senior Coordinator for Environmental Stewardship. And there are committees throughout the Bureau who look at data on a quarterly basis and assess that information, look at the trends, and identify if there are areas of concern that require further consideration. And so I've become responsible for outlining a course of action to begin to address those issues of concern. And so I just wanted to share with you some of the things that have come out through that effort. BSEE Vital Statistics shows that pollution Inc. has significantly declined since 2017, especially since 2018. And overall, if you were to look at the body of pollution prevention inspections that are performed by our district, only 1.5% of them actually result in a pollution Inc. So just on the face of it, that's pretty favorable statistics. Despite those favorable statistics, however, analysis has shown that there may still be ways to improve how we document the causes for pollution prevention failures. So, you know, as a part of our enforcement program, it's really important for us to have the capability to really understand the root cause of what's happening, and then to be able to evaluate where we can drive improvement and change, whether that's through, you know, revised regulation, or that's through improving our interaction and communication with operators to understand what's going on, things like that. So there's still some room for improvement, and I've been working with several folks within the Bureau, particularly in the Gulf of Mexico, to help look at our policies and figure out if there are ways for us to improve our procedures there. So you may start to see some things happening over the course of the next few months on that. From the perspective of the environmental resources that I was talking about earlier, you know, we have very specific environmental conditions and standards that we place on activities, starting from, you know, ancillary survey activities to characterize the lease and understand the resources that are there, all the way down to commissioning. And so BSEE Vital Statistics shows that industry performance with these specific environmental standards is pretty good in most areas. And so if you look at this figure here, the columns in blue are where since 2017 we've seen compliance, 100% compliance with specific environmental standards associated with habitat protection, associated with archaeological resource protection, associated with marine protected species, and as well as artificial reefing. But there are additional improvements that are needed, particularly marine trash and debris prevention on offshore facilities. We generally have seen through inspections that there's a pretty good area of improvement, a need for improvement there when it comes to marking debris, especially when it comes to managing debris on facilities that may be unmanned or you know, in some type of an abandoned status. So there's some work that needs to be done there. Overall, air emission compliance is at approximately 86%, which is not bad. However, if you were to drill down a little bit further into that analysis, you will find that compared to looking at compliance with specific environmental standards through reporting that may be required, such as fuel consumption activity or you know, complying with stack testing results, when we actually get into the field and do a field observation, we find that compliance is pretty low. It ranges from about 20% to 63% annually. And a lot of times that's due to operators not you know, tracking changing of their equipment, right? They may be adding additional emission sources and not considering that in their analysis, in their annual emission limits. Occasionally we find fugitive emissions through infrared surveys that we perform. Sometimes we note hazardous accumulation of gas through those particular types of surveys. So we find that there's quite a bit of room for improvement when it comes to air emission compliance offshore. So we have some opportunities to explore and to really drill down and address some of these trends that are showing through the data. And that's really one of the benefits of this environmental stewardship focus, having that ability to really look at industry's performance overall and where we may be able to help drive improvement on that. So that concludes my presentation. So any questions at this point? Or feedback, thoughts, recommendations?
Ramona, again, I've been scanning as you were talking, and I'm seeing no hands raised or questions in the chat box.
Okay.
So we'll go through one more round here, just one more chance to voice your thoughts as I'm searching through. Going once, going twice. All right. Ramona, I see no questions or comments. Thank you. And again, we'll do this afternoon. I do have one question for everybody else. I had someone make a comment about a future topic on filling out the 5432, I believe it is, the inspection form. Make sure I got that number right. 5431. Sorry. Does that sound like a good topic for everyone? If you do, just show of hands here, and I'll take a quick survey. Show of hands if that's a good topic and you'd like to hear more about it. Okay, we got a positive there from one. And I see a couple other hands raised. Great. I will make sure we get a subject matter expert on that, and we will have that as a topic. In the meanwhile, if there's something else that you would like to hear a presentation on, please let me know. All right. Looks like we got a consensus there as far as a topic. Again, another topic. If there's other topics, how about things like safety alerts? Would you like some more explanations on those? Show of hands, comments? Okay, some of the more recent ones that have just come out, we can get some explanations on those. Okay, good. I think I'll put those two on the lineup there for near future webinar sessions. All right, with that, happy St. Patrick's Day to everybody, and you all be careful. Again, we will do this again at 1 o'clock. Thanks for your participation. And again, Ramona, thank you for your presentation.
Thank you, everyone.